today to not interfere in the proceedings, and as soon as the hearing is closed, please leave quietly. And so now if we just start with introductions, I'm Deputy Catherine Curtis, the chair of the panel.
I'm Deputy Porray and I'm a panel member.
Deputy Helen Miles, panel member.
Deputy Rob Ward, Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning.
Deputy Karina Owls, Assistant Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning.
Jonathan Williams, Programme Director for SIPES.
Keith Posner, Interim Chief Officer for SIPES.
Jane Lancaster-Adlam, Associate Director for Education.
Okay, thank you everyone. So the first set of questions are around the trans inclusion guidance. So the panel has been contacted by a number of members of the public who've shared concerns about the updated trans inclusion guidance, and also members of the public who have been supporting it. So, Minister, could you start by explaining your department's position with regards to supporting trans and gender diverse students in education and how the new trans inclusion guidance reflects that?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. The trans inclusion guidance is a reflection of the position in line with Jersey law. I need to say that in Jersey, no child or person under 18 can receive any medical or specific therapeutic intervention. So this is non-statutory guidance, supports our children in receiving proportionate and supportive advice from appropriate services. The guidance, and it's really important it's understood as guidance, is for schools and school leaders to enable them to respond to any student who comes to them for advice. It also ensures that there is a consistent response to all their children, regardless of the school attended. And I think that, that's the key points behind it.
Okay, so are there measures in place to protect gender questioning children from being subjected to bullying?
Well, that would be part of the school's normal anti-bullying policy. Trans is an identified characteristic within our discrimination law, and I think that needs to be remembered. But yes, it will be a normal part of anti-bullying policy within school. I mean, there are a number of issues that children at times, and they need to be, checked every so often in terms of their behaviour.
Okay, so now I'll have to read out a fairly long question to be able to get the point across for my next one. On page 8 of the updated trans inclusion guidance, it states that gender dysphoria is treatable through a process called transitioning. It has been put to the panel that this statement fails to acknowledge that transitioning is not the only treatment option for gender dysphoria, and nor is it always the most appropriate one for every child. And dysphoria, and that the statement risks discriminating against children who experience gender dysphoria but do not wish to transition. So could you describe the advice that your department received to frame the guidance in that way?
Yeah, first of all, I have to say schools are not medical professionals, and it's not their place to say what should and shouldn't be done. I will say, though, that in the same paragraph that you mentioned, if you keep reading the next two sentences, the guidance discusses what transitioning could involve: social, medical and/or surgical intervention. And then it goes on to make sure that it's known that it's not available in Jersey, and also states it can only be treated, in inverted commas, by a medical professional and under the care of a gender therapist. It goes on to inform that there is no means under the age of 18 to see a gender therapist or to transition privately. I think you'd have to go to the UK for that. They have different laws for us. So the process of transition is not supported in that way if you read the entire paragraph, and it makes clear that under the age of 18 there is no mechanism for that.
Okay, and so this sort of leads on to the next question, which is about the watch and wait policy that's mentioned. So, Minister, can you define and describe the watch and wait policy that's referenced in the guidance?
Yeah, and I thank you for asking about this, because I think this has been sort of missed to some extent. Due to the fact that there is no available medical or clinical support for children identifying as trans in Jersey, watch and wait means that no medical or clinical intervention can take place. Schools will work with children and the family, very importantly, to ensure that those supported within feel safe and manage their feelings in a proportionate way. there are clearly identified poor mental health outcomes which disproportionately affect our trans community, and ensuring the right amount of support is in place to keep all our children safe emotionally, physically and mentally is of great importance to everyone in schools. So watch and wait is a term typically used in the medical field. Due to the fact that children who may state they are trans cannot have any medical or clinical support in Jersey, then no other policy can be employed. There is therefore a watch and wait policy. Keeping our children safe and ensuring that needs are met in non-medical way is vital, and making sure there is support in place for our children for their psychological, physical and mental safety is threaded through the guidance. And I think that's such an important point. Under the age of 18, there is nothing available. So there is clearly a watch and wait policy in place.
Another concern raised is about, or maybe a very good thing, I don't know, but the case-by-case basis assessment and decision-making. So can you describe the structure that's in place to facilitate this?
That's
presumably be difficult for teachers.
So yeah, this is the point about the guidance. It's a very difficult space for teachers to be in. I will also say there are very, very few examples of this, which to some extent makes it even more important because it has to be got right. There's a flowchart on page 29. I just wanted to add as well that the watch and wait policy also comes into this flowchart, which does not place any pressure on the child to live or behave in accordance with their registered births if they want to do that, or move rapidly to social transitioning. It's, if you like, it's a neutral position of purely support that has been put in place because there is no facility on the island to give a diagnosis or to act on it. And so the flow chart, which is, I don't have in front of me, I'm afraid, but it is in the guidance, will give a number of options around that space. But I think that the interpretation that's been made of saying that children are encouraged is simply not the case.
Can I just add something on the watchful wait approach? It's not something that is just considered in this scenario. Across schools, we also use it when we're dealing with scenarios suspected of like autism, ADHD, or sexuality questioning, for example. So it's not just an approach that is used within this guidance.
And I think it's a recognition that children, grow and they go through periods of their life where they may experience different experiences. So I think it's very important, that watch and wait policy.
Okay, and we were talking about the assessing and decision-making on a case-by-case basis as well, because this is quite a responsibility for teachers, isn't it? And so how is your department supporting schools to implement this guidance consistently, especially in areas where community views may differ? So you may have some families who feel very strongly against this or for the guidance. How is the department supporting the schools?
And that's exactly the really difficult position that schools are in, and they're in those positions a lot of the time around any sort of social issue. Each school will have a designated safeguarding lead, and they're the person really responsible for supporting staff with the process outlined in the document. I know from my own experience of being a teacher, if a child approached me with anything that they wanted to disclose, I would immediately say, I'm not going to keep this to myself because I think it's really important that you talk to somebody. And the safeguard leads are probably in a much better position than myself, than teachers at the time. So there is a mechanism to do that, to encourage children to be open about where they are, to engage with their family, to be engaged with other people as well. So there's a much fuller support mechanism in place there. And, young people have to come to terms with a lot of changes in how they are in their life in their own time frame. And I think it's important that people are allowed to do that without pressure being put on either way.
Okay, so the safeguarding leads could support the teachers as well in there.
And
You've also got obviously the SENCO, which is the Special Educational Needs Coordinator. You've got mental health first aiders and other kind of specialist staff.
That's very important. Yeah, thanks. And I think schools have moved enormous distance. It's not perfect yet because the need is growing across schools in so many areas. I absolutely recognise that, would not deny that. That's one of the challenges we've got in the future. But safeguarding these SENCOs, mental health first aiders, the way what's the thing I went to with the children where we're teaching them about how to resolve conflict resolution.
Resilience, resolution centres.
All of these things are working so that children have ways to work through, not just this, but lots of other areas that they find challenging in their lives. And I think those are having real success in our schools to enable children to work things through.
So this next question is about where some children might want something, some other children might want something else. So in terms of safeguarding on school trips and residentials, how does the department support schools in balancing inclusion with privacy and safety, particularly with respect to dormitory arrangements for transgender pupils?
Well, each is done on a case-by-case basis. I've been on a number of school trips off island, and the risk assessment is a folder that thick on every single issue you could possibly, from crossing to road to where, what you're going to do to ensure children are in their rooms at night, for example, because children are children. Risk assessments for all children must be completed. Any consideration and mitigated is catered for. This can be bespoke, so it may be separate sleeping arrangements, it might be a waking watch, but all children will be taken, the safety of all children will be taken into account on a trip. I mean, there are scenarios when you go on a trip where you know that two children, for example, are in a relationship. You have to be extremely careful on a trip when that's happening. This is the reality of life when you are acting in loco parentis for a group of children when you take them away. So this is another area where safeguarding and risk assessment, a full risk assessment would be produced in terms of the safety of all children involved. Parents also have meetings with the staff running the trips. Any questions can be raised, any concerns can be raised, because the last thing you want on a trip is a child not being happy when you're in the middle of Barcelona or Rome or any place around the world that you may go to with a group of young people.
Okay, so that's case-by-case basis and full risk assessment.
So I could just make the point though that would be the case on so many different areas. This is not a new thing to work on case-by-case basis. Yeah.
Okay, so this next question is something that I was actually quite puzzled about. So Minister, Section 29 of the guidance highlights the potential need for additional support for pupils with special educational needs and disabilities in understanding their own identity. So could you outline what evidence or research has informed this approach, and also confirm what resources are available to support staff? Because I'm just not sure what it was getting at there, actually.
I think this is where the specially trained, the SENCO, the Special Educational Needs Coordinator, and a designated safeguarding lead and mental health first aiders come into effect. Where children are in a specialist setting, for example, with significant needs, there may be issues around identity, there may be issues around a number of different areas of their being, which require multi-agency approaches to them. And that would be part of the process of saying, okay, how are we going to work through this? Remember that context always behind this, that there is no, under the age of 18, mechanism at all for any diagnosis or any medical treatment. And so any issue that is present must be addressed, by support, by talking, by, I don't know what the phrase, talking, I suppose.
Okay, no, it's just that the way it was written, I didn't quite grasp what it meant. So is that referring to children with special educational needs who are gender questioning? Is that what it's
No, I
referring
think it's wider than that. I think it's wider than just gender question. It's about in terms of their identity as, their behaviour age, their
So it's finding their way in the world, isn't
Yeah,
it?
their
And understanding
social age.
themselves.
So if a child with a child with a specific education who may be older but may not have behaviours that fit around that age, I think that's the most frequent example of
I
that.
still don't quite get it because I would have thought they knew as much about their identity as anyone else would, but that's, anyway, we'll leave it.
I think it's the word identity that's the issue there, because identity is a bit much broader issue, but I think also that's an important word because it is around identity. As you grow in the world, if you are, you have severe needs, not severe is the wrong word, significant needs that need to be addressed. One of the issues maybe have is it's what the deputy here said, how you find your way in the world. And I think what's happened there is the word identity has been used. I mean, it's I don't know how many 1,000-word document, so the odd word you have to be careful with. We can look at that, absolutely.
Can I just ask, would you say that the schools can act as a safer place for children to explore their identities
Schools should be a safe...
without judgment or?
Well, I think schools should be a safe place for children, full stop. But one of the most important things about a school is the relationship between the school, the child and the family. When those three things, that triumvirate of relationships go well, then I think schools deal every single day with challenges from across the board. So those relationships are really important. One of the first things you would do as a teacher is try and engage with family. That could be about, why is your child late every morning, to all sorts of issues and disclosures. And yes, it is a very difficult thing to do. We live in a complex world and children have complex experiences, but teachers are doing their very best to do that. And remember, at the same time, they're trying to deliver a curriculum, get results, and they're, challenged on results which are published in the newspapers out of context. So it's a really challenging role.
I think sometimes school can be a safe haven for a lot of young people, where their family or home life may be very different, and so it does provide that level of stability and safety to them. And I think that's really important that as a school, that all schools do that, and they do have that option, and so that any student can feel comfortable and know that they're safe.
But that's wider than any one issue. That's across so
So
many different areas.
If I ask one more question on this and then see if the panel members wanted to ask anything else. What indicators will you use to measure whether the guidance is improving the school experience, students, and how will that feedback be captured?
Yeah, it's difficult in terms of indicators, in terms of quantitative indicators. But there will be a review of schools with the children and families that have to be part of the process outlined in the trans guidance, because children and families were included, and this will take place in October 2025. And I think that the evaluation needs to go around, what's different, what has worked well, where do you see problems, where have there been challenges.
Just to also pick up as well on page 10 of the guidance, staff training is recommended every 2 years as well.
But I think this area has been highlighted recently, and perhaps it's healthy to have some clarity, and I'm pleased to answer questions today. But this is not something that's new to schools. Schools have dealt with these issues and dealt with lots of issues for many, 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 many years. There's not an agenda for any school other than to look after their children, make sure all children feel safe and secure in being at school, and hopefully achieve really well and do well and go and get really good jobs and earn lots of money and pay their taxes and pay all their pensions. I keep saying that.
Okay. Sorry,
Bit of an extrapolation
I
there.
may have missed what you said about the evaluation. You said October 25.
25,
and
yeah.
who will be asked about how that
And
is?
it will be effectively anyone involved with the guidance and his schools. See, this is the thing, because it's small numbers, I think the best thing would be to go to schools and say, okay, how have you used the guidance? Where has it fitted in? What has worked well? What hasn't? Are there families that have had a problem with the guidance, where have those problems
It would be
been?
head teachers who would be asked then.
Well,
I
it would be
suppose.
staff probably designating safeguarding leads, Senkos would be perhaps the most appropriate person to do that, with the head teachers having an overview.
Okay. Have you had any initial feedback or early feedback from parents to the department or teachers to the departments? Because
To
it's
be-
quite a newly published policy
yeah.
that
To be
had quite a
absolute-
high profile.
To be absolutely honest, not really, because I think schools just look at it and say, well, we're dealing with these issues all the time. There's new guidance, thank you very much. And because they're small numbers, I mean, I'll be controversial and say perhaps a lot of teachers will only read it when it becomes relevant, and therefore most teachers will never read the guidance. They're getting on with their day-to-day jobs and caring for children. There'll be many teachers who will say, look, you know, I really think I know how to care for children. We're not trying to promote anything either way. I've been neutral throughout my entire career. Thanks for the guidance. I'll use it where is appropriate. I think that is going to be the way that this develops in terms of saying, okay, and I think that's the practicality. Where is the issue that we're trying to address? What is the issue in our schools? Is there something that's growing? Is there something that's become a real problem? If so, does the guidance help with addressing that issue? If it doesn't, then let's address that guidance and let's address where we're going. But at the moment, I mean, I may be wrong, but I've not seen massive issues in our schools.
No, and schools actually wanted the guidance. So it
Yeah.
was actually head
Yeah.
teachers that came forward, and that's how it was driven forward.
Yeah, and I think, but because this is a difficult area, I think some things are being conflated together regards with this. You know, one of the issues was around toilets. Now, toilets were refurbished in schools because basically old toilets, as a child said to me, and this is not a reflection on the school at all, because the head teacher had his head in his hands when he was being shown around by the children, who to remember the child had said to us, oh, the old toilets, you didn't go in there because they were full of people vaping. And the poor head teacher had his head in his hands. And I said, well, what about these ones? Oh, they're much better because you've got privacy. And they come out onto a corridor. And as an ex-teacher, if I was on duty, I could stand at the end of that area and supervise children going in. I could say to them, wash your hands, which is always a good thing to do. And I think that is it, that children now feel safer going to the toilet at school because they have a private floor-to-ceiling door. Many of them have sinks in. It's better for girls as well, if they're during their period, for example. It's more private, there are bins. And so that sort of became an issue when really it was to improve the experience of young people to school to use the facilities, basically. And I don't think there's been, if you speak to young people, there's not been an issue there. They actually feel safer. Now, you can label them men's and women's if you want, or you can just, I think for practicality, there's, you know, you probably could build a lot more toilets for a school of 900 children, but there's only so much space. There's a real practicality to this, which is, you know, they're better places, and you know, if they can't vape and smoke and bully people, that's even better. Let's be honest, that's become a byproduct of that, and head teachers are very pleased with that, and so are children. Yeah. I don't know how we got onto toilets, but
Yeah,
we did.
okay.
Sorry about that.
No, it's Helena, isn't it? Sorry.
Just to change your focus onto the educational psychology service, please.
Yeah.
Can you outline for us, Minister, please, how your department is monitoring the effectiveness of the current educational psychology service in terms of quality and the impact on children and young people, particularly in complex cases?
Yeah, I have to say, I have a table of data here, and it's too small for me to read. Okay. I actually have my contact lenses in, and it's not helping. So whoever printed this, it's too small. In terms of the case numbers, Jane, would you like to? You might be able to read that data because I'm afraid I can't.
I'll show the data.
Oh, you've got it on screen.
So we track the data consistently within the department of the number of cases. So we have termly PALM meetings, which is planning and review meetings at every school, at which there's a multidisciplinary team there. So there may be ASCIT, there was some team, then an educational psychologist. Currently, we've had 155 requests for involvement for this academic year, and we've had 97 records for involvement which have been completed, 44 that are allocated and waiting to be done. So actually, with our exceptional action, We have had a total of 70. 57 of those are completed, and we've got 13 outstanding, which are due to have been completed by the 21st of May. Now, I have to say that all of this work is our statutory work, and we have prioritised at the current time the statutory work that we're required to do in law.
Okay. I mean, you've told us there about what you've done.
Yeah.
My question is about effectiveness. So how well have you done it? How do you monitor the quality of the interventions that your psychologists are delivering?
That's a really good question. I think you're going to have to answer.
Yeah,
that, isn't
that's
it?
fine. So the work, the statutory work, is around actually assessing young people, and they are standardised assessments and observations. Those are compiled into a report for each young person, and then those reports are used if a young person is going to have a record of need. So they are monitored, and obviously the people that are actually carrying out those reports are all registered practitioners with the HCPC.
Okay. So how do you ensure that the practicing educational psychologists are appropriately supervised and supported in practice? And what is the process for kind of monitoring their adherence to those
HCPC standards? So, from the point of view of supervision,
No,
yeah,
go on.
do you want me to-
I know about supervision, but go on, carry on.
carry on.
No, I was going to say, in terms of supervision, there is this thing called supervision, which is across the health service, and I think all of our education psychologists have supervision. The one might be from the UK at the moment in terms of the supervision,
We've got mixed supervision.
mixed supervision, but that's an important integral part of that, maintaining professionalism and knowing where you are, and that relationship between professionals is really important.
Yeah, so our current psychologists at the moment working, actually practicing within the team, are having external supervision now, as well as supervision with specific cases from the lead psychologist.
Can I just add quickly, I just have to say, every school that we've visited lately, and we've asked the question, how is the educational psychology service working? And they've said it's not working. So I just wanted to add that in, and we will listen to what you're saying, but this is
Can
the
I-
feedback we are getting.
Okay, can I
from
just
the
ask, how
schools.
many schools was that?
So in the last month, the last couple of schools we visited.
So is that 2? And then when they say
Well,
it's not
I
working,
can't.
that's
I'm not thinking back further than that at the moment.
I
But
think
this
it'd
is the same response.
yeah, it'd be interesting to get some other feedback on that, because there's an absolute it's not working. There'll be levels of it not working, and I think the only way you
They
can
just
solve
shake their
that.
heads.
Yeah, well,
put
I
hands in
think
the air.
but I think that's what we need to address, and we need to look at what that means so that we can address that, and that's really important to us.
I think it's important to say that in terms of the statutory work, that is being completed, but there are other elements within the psychology service that are not being completed at the moment in terms of training, for example.
Yeah.
We're not doing enough of that.
Yeah.
So there will be absolute references, and we have to take that on board.
Yeah.
But we are absolutely committed to improving the service over the next few months.
Sorry, that was what I was going at. Is for us, it'd be really interesting to understand what they are. That's exactly the point, and I think it is around the fact that, as you said, the statutory work is happening. That's being done. But it's those extra bits that would be done that we need to be able to address, and that needs to be improving as we go into the future. I absolutely accept that.
Okay. How is the department ensuring that the assistant psychologists, because you've got quite a few of those at the moment, only 2, okay, who are not fully qualified, are appropriately supervised and supported in their practice?
I think the lead educational psychologist supervises the post-training supervision. Supervision can take place with the educational as they're assigned each individual work with a class, for example, and team meetings can also take place. So it's an ongoing process as they get involved in their psychology, their assessment. I suppose, to put it really simply, I see it as a sort of on-the-job training and supervision as you go forward.
Is there a difference in the workload and the quality of the work between your assistant psychologists and your fully qualified educational psychologists, or are the assistants having to step in?
No, the assistants support a trained, fully qualified psychologist. So the assistants help support with training and development. So we have been doing some training and development, and if they've been doing that, then the psychologist that was with them will do supervision post that but then they also work on individual cases alongside education. That's obviously how they learn and develop, and they have their supervision then with that lead, fully qualified psychologist.
How many full-time educational psychologists have you got in post at the moment?
So we've got 2 full-time educational psychologists and 1 part-time in that they are on island 2 weeks a month.
Okay, so the total team then is 3 educational psychologists and 2 assistant psychologists.
Correct, and a clinical psychologist.
And a clinical psychologist is based within
the team.
CAMS
No, it's based within the educational PORBS team.
Okay, thank you. So what is the current strategy then at the moment to recruit and retain educational psychologists?
The strategy at the moment is to hopefully get to the point where we have a full complement actually working in post, which would be 5
Okay,
with a clinical psychologist and 2.
so have you got an ongoing recruitment process?
Yes, we have a plan to ensure we get up to capacity by the
Okay.
beginning of the next academic year.
Next academic
Yeah, for September.
It's September. Yeah.
This September,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
This September.
And we're also looking just widely around the service and making sure that we're going to address some of those needs that you picked out around schools, and the service is able, with increased capacity, to start dealing with a range of different activities that they need to do.
Okay.
We also use off-island psychologists for our early years work, and we've been doing that for the last 3 years. So we have got, I think it's 35 cases that will be commissioned there.
Can I
When you
also?
say off island, do you mean actually that the work is being done remotely?
It is done remotely.
How does that work from an educational psychology perspective? Because is it not a face-to-face service?
It is generally a face-to-face service, but this is the early years, so this is very young children. And we have a lot of different reports that have come in with speech and language. And it's obviously, we use Teams, so it is face-to-face, but it's not actually in physical healing.
I think what
It's
we
not
do.
ideal though, is it?
It's,
No.
no, it's not
It's not ideal. And look, there is another issue which, we can feed you for later on. As we look at the increasing need in the coming years, and we are doing some work which we will present as a holistic thing about the future of education, the reality is, and it's a reality we all have to face, future governments after future government, is need is increasing. And so we will need more of those resources into the
And
future.
I think that's why your recruitment strategy is important,
Absolutely,
and that's why we're asking.
And
It just sounds
yeah.
like a long way off, September.
September in terms of getting back to the full complement of
Yeah.
the numbers we have now. But yes, you're right. We've got to look at the throughput of psychologists coming into the team. We've also got to, as the Minister said, and I'm sure at some point we'll talk about wider need and then what the service will look like going forward.
And there's also perhaps the hope that we can train our own.
That would be good. I know CAMS are doing some good work training clinical psychologists.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think there is, sorry, just to go something for the future, because it is sometimes nice to look ahead. I think that would be a very good thing, because we have young, talented people coming forward who could train it and become an integral part of that provision on Ireland.
Okay. Can you provide us with a breakdown of the annual expenditure on the psychology locums since 2020? If you haven't got that information to hand, you can put that in writing, but it's just, okay.
I do have that from 2020.
Yeah,
We have no data for 2020, I'm afraid.
Okay.
2021 was £40,566.62. Do you want the pennies, or should I just round it
no,
up?
so this is about the locums, yeah?
22 was 43,994. That increased to 101,000 in 23 and 174,000 in 24. And to date, it's 54,115 pounds.
Okay. And has any sort of research been done on the outcomes and the value for money of the local model? Is it a good model?
Well, I think
Sorry.
No, well, all I was going to say is I think we want to be in a position where we're not having to use kind of outside from the government. So this is just a position we find ourselves in. Obviously, we have statutory work we need to complete, and this is part of that process.
Okay.
So
The figures that you've quoted there for the locums, is that just the wages? Presumably on top of that you'll have travel accommodation, etc., etc.
I can't answer that. That's the
I
figure
think
I
we need to
have.
come back to you on that.
Yeah, we
Okay,
need to come back to that.
if you could.
But I just want to reiterate, it's not necessarily where we want to be, but in order to keep the service going, and we want to build on that. We want to get it into the right place, and we want it to be working well. That money has to be spent at this moment in time.
Thank you. Is there any formal protocol governing the referral of the handover of cases between CAMS and educational psychology?
No. Referral from CAMS is made directly by the school at SENCO, the Special Educational Needs Coordinator. If any request for involvement, which is what Jane talked about, requested, then there's a service. The service requires parental consent before we share with colleagues in CAMS.
Okay.
Yeah, so the school can identify, but then there needs to be parental consent to share with CAMS. Is that right in the way it works?
So schools can refer to CAMS directly themselves. If CAMS have been working on a case and they contact us, educational psychology, we would then have to seek parental consent
Yes,
for that
sorry.
information to be shared jointly.
That's
Okay,
what I
so the
meant.
fact that you're both
Explained it
within
badly.
SIPES doesn't enable that data sharing. Okay. Are there any shared responsibilities and funding arrangements between education and CAMS? Do you have like a, does CAMS charge you for EdPsych, and does EdPsych charge CAMS for?
No.
Okay, so it's just a one
And
across
there
the
are a lot
board.
of multi-agency meetings where I don't think anyone, to some extent, it's not important which department they're from, they're all working on the same thing around that child, and that's really, I think that's working, that's been in many iterations over the years, and I think we'll probably change again as to what's best to do that, but yeah.
So whilst you're all under one umbrella, there's no cross-charging mechanisms?
No, I don't believe there are.
No. Okay, thank you.
If there are, I'd like to know about it, but I don't know.
Can you tell the panel what action you're going to take to expand the early intervention capacity in secondary schools?
Yeah, it's about training another cohort of ELSA, which is
Emotional literacy.
it's the SA.
Yeah.
What's the SA stand for?
Support
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 assistance.
assistant. Sorry. Colleagues, that's in spring 2025, so this spring term. And then at full capacity, there should be offer of training, support parent training, delivery workshops for parents and school staff, support curriculum evenings and attend community-based events with stores and activities. So there's a number of wide-ranging things to try and get to families, to communities, in terms of that early interventions in secondary
Have
schools.
you already got ELSAs in secondary schools, or have you only got them in primary schools?
There are in some.
In
some
some, not
secondary, yeah.
not all. Okay, and is that going to be facilitated through CAMS or specifically through the department at SIPES?
Through SIPES, isn't it?
Through SIPES.
Yeah. And that's an important point. That's a good point that you make, because in primaries, and then there's the extension to secondaries, when you see the value, they extend out. But we've got to also make sure that that value is there.
Yeah. So how many secondaries have you got them in at the moment, if not all?
I'd have to check the data. I can get you that.
Thank you. Okay.
I think I know two.
Yes, but I'm not sure. Some schools have more than one as well. So
Oh, I
I
see.
just need
Yeah,
to.
exactly. You'll get the data for
Thank
me,
you.
Minister, I'm going to ask you some questions regarding the secondary education review follow-up. My first question is, what progress has been done on the commitment to review the Education Jersey Law 1999?
Yeah, the main change was the alignment of the formula with the available budget. And there was an adjustment to the formula. So rather than just reducing the output from the formula was adjusted in terms to fit with the funding that's available. So that change was made in terms of saying that we have to work within an amount of money. Do I want more money? Of course, always want more money. We always need that. Well, I hope we can talk about that later, because I'm more than happy to.
So is that the funding driving
yeah.
policy?
Well, it will do, because you're within a funding amount, yeah, and you've got to fit it into it. Of course you have. But that has been published, and we said that we would publish that, and that is available, yeah.
What about in terms of work being done regarding the rights of the children? Is any work being done in that area at the moment?
What do you mean in terms of?
For example, to consider your review with the compatibility of the UNCRC rights of the children. Has that been looked into?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how that is something that we're directly doing as a project. No.
But when you're looking at reviewing the law, you
Oh
see
yes,
how
of
it
course. It will be,
aligns with the UNCLC.
Sorry, we're talking about yes. It would absolutely. Trying to desperately think of an example because there was one the other day where we had exactly this conversation. It will come back to me. Apologies.
Thank you.
Let me write down UNCRC and it will
Okay. So
stimulate my memory some way.
would you be in a position to clarify what progress you hope to your department to do before the 2026 elections?
What we want to be able to do in general, there's a few things that I'm very keen on. We've done some work, as you know, with nursery provision and those hours.
This is about the education law.
Oh, the education law.
Yeah, it's yeah.
Yes.
The main parts in the education law that I want to address are around, we want to look at a statutory provision for apprenticeships, see whether that's available, whether that will be done by 2026, I don't know, but I think we could certainly get the basis in place there. Because once you've got a statutory provision, it helps you develop what you're going to do longer term, and I will be producing something that gives a longer term view of where we need to go and the options that are there for the future, whoever comes into this role in the next 20 years, over the next 20 years, because there are long term things that are needed. What are the other key things that we're doing in terms? We've done a number of things on mixing up the laws.
I think we're in a position where through the work that we're doing within the department, and I know there's a question on leadership, that will then feed into what changes need to be had in the law. So in terms of, and then the specific work will start in terms of them working with the policy team and then the drafters. So we're kind of in that discovery phase in terms of what that's going to look like.
So would it be fair to say that presently you are more focused on continuous work rather than
Yeah, you're right. I think
looking at new?
I think putting in place
Projects.
the things that we want to put in place, in terms of delivery of an apprenticeship is an example
That's a
that
specific
sprung to
example,
mind.
absolutely.
Then once I've always said that we want to know that we're able to do things before we simply change the law. So, for example, we want to make sure there is a genuine provision up to the age of 18 for everybody before we say we'll make it compulsory for 18. Because it's very easy to do that. And they can say, oh, everything's compulsory to 18, and then there's nothing available. Another example is the 2 to 3 year old provision for nursery hours. I have said very clearly we want to make sure that provision is available before we offer those hours. Otherwise, it's a false promise. I think we're at a very clear, close point now where that is available, and the work that's gone on has enabled that. And I'm really, really pleased. And I won't say anything today, but in the coming months, I hope we can talk really clearly about that.
We've got some questions on early years, if
Okay,
we
that's
get
fine,
to
we'll
that
come back
point
to
in
that,
the question plan.
So yes, you're right. The actions that we're taking and doing really will change to the law rather than just changing the law. Also, the education law is such a huge piece of work; it would just take up all the time. And I think we'd rather get on with other things.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, you have responded partial accept to the panel's recommendation to review the Jersey system of academically selective transfer at age of 14. You also said that you could not commit to a review at this time, but that there would be necessary to consider options due to the forthcoming challenge of changing demographics.
Yeah.
Okay. Please, can you describe any work that you will be commencing in this area and advise us of any particular timelines and what you envisage that will have an impact on the demographics of
Yeah.
the education program?
Well, a huge amount of work has already started. One on the demographics, and we presented to you privately the demographic changes. We've presented those to schools. We've met with head teachers across schools, and a lot of work has been going on with those. That was presented to head teachers in general as well. So those demographics, and what we're trying to do is put clearly on the table the challenges that we face in the future. And I'm going to use this word purposefully, the opportunities that will come to us in the future with changing demographics. The other piece of work that is going on that is linked to that partial acceptance is the work on post-16 provision. And this afternoon we're going to another school We've been to 2 schools already to talk to students. Here's a remarkable idea. When we start doing work on post-16, we're going to talk to the young people involved first, because actually they're an excellent source of information and the experience of their post-16 provision. So we're talking to students from year 9 up to year 13 to talk about what is available to them, what do they want to be available, where are the challenges, what works well, what would they like to see change. And I think that as we look forward with demographics, the reality will be in the next 3, 4, 5, up to 10 years, that the provision that we make post-16 in the island needs to be much more open and accessible to everybody. When that happens, there may well be an effect on the provision before that because of demographic change. And we have to have a realistic, honest, open and intelligent conversation about that. About what is that going to look like into the future? Can we sustain what we've got now? Or if we can keep the money we have now into a smaller system, we can meet that need better. And that's what we're going to do. That's why it was a partial acceptance. To be quite frank, a conversation around post-14 plus transfer now would just become a huge distraction to the much, much wider issues that we have to face in education, which is what's the future of education going to look like in the next 10 years as demographics change, demands increase, the qualifications are changing, the future qualifications are changing, the skills that are needed are changing, the abilities that are needed are changing, but there's an opportunity now.
But I think
Yeah.
for Deputy Porrie's next question, it's really important right now for 14-year-olds, isn't it? So
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's not going to change in the next, before the election in particular. So.
So what about, Minister, in terms of support for academic and pastoral support? Is there any in place, or if it is, what sort of support is there for the pupils impacted by the 14 plus transfer, particularly for those who feel left behind? Is there further support for those?
Yeah. I mean, our 11 to 16 schools are working incredibly hard with every single one of their students. There are opportunities for students. Some choose not to transfer at 14. If you don't transfer at 14, there are still those huge expectations of your achievement. The courses are delivered. A full range of GCSEs are delivered across those schools.
How do you identify the support needed? Is it case by case basis? How does it work?
Do you mean for?
Well, we highlighted in our report, didn't we, that it was brought to us by head teachers about children who had all their friends perhaps going to Holier,
Oh, I see, yeah.
sitting on a table at their own at lunchtime and so on, feeling
and
that they'd failed, all this sort of thing. So
Yeah.
is there any extra support being brought in since we highlighted
The fact that that's recognised by head teachers means that their pastoral support system within the school should be addressing those issues, and I'm sure that they do. And that's what we work with with form tutors. I mean, I've been a form teacher, Deputy Alves has been a form tutor, and you're very aware of your young people in your classroom. And yes, that is a particular time where you do need to be very aware and support those young people. They might need to make new friendship groups. They may have, they've not got their friendship groups that they had before. Absolutely. It's one of the issues around 14 plus transfer that we do have to address. Is there extra support in those areas? I would suggest that, yes, of course, but it's not formal support in terms of, okay, now we're going to intervene with this. It is knowing your students. And certainly
On
form
a
teachers,
case by case.
heads of years and so on will know their students.
Okay, so with regards to staff, Minister, you did accept the panel's recommendation to provide more information about the use of 0-hour contracts for staff in schools. Please could you confirm when you will be able to provide that information to the panel by?
I can't confirm. We'll have to come back to you on
Would
that.
you be able
It's
to?
certainly
Thank you.
I mean, I'm not a fan of 0 hours contracts, if I'm honest, to put it simply.
Yes.
Where is there a situation where that'd be necessary? I don't know, to be quite frank. When we have supply staff, but would you call that 0 hours contracts? I suppose in some forms you would. We are looking at a different system for supply staff that we'll
Yes.
come back to you with,
That would
which
be
would take
good.
away that issue, and I think would be more effective for our schools. starting with primary schools first of all, I think
And-
will really assist.
Perhaps looking into how the zero-hour contracts really affect staff.
Yeah.
We have the understanding that has been shared with us in the panel that some staff actually prefer that, but the panel heard different confirmations.
yeah.
So it would be really interesting to see how that impacts on the staff.
I think-
And moving forward, can those numbers be reduced? And
Yeah.
if so, how?
Absolutely, and I think the underlying principle behind it all needs to be, if somebody's employed in education, they need to be happy with their contract. They need to feel part of the organisation and need to be part of the school that they're in.
And who are the zero-hour contracts benefiting? The staff or the department?
I can't
Okay.
tell it off the top
Would
of my
be
head.
nice to hear some.
It's also opinion of those individual staff.
I will say that some staff have been offered fixed term contracts with hours each week, but they've declined. So that's been our experience.
It's purely the flexibility, isn't it? It could also be, I mean, I don't know, make a mass generalisation here, but if staff have retired and want to come back a few days a week, they also might want to have that flexibility to say, actually, I don't want to do these 2 weeks because I'm off somewhere or I'm doing
That's
something
what we want to
particular.
hear from yourselves, as well as those net positives, some
We might be
that
able to
may
give
not
some
be working
examples.
so well
I
for
don't
staff.
think we'll be able to give you a definitive answer in general because it will change by the very nature. But yeah,
Thank you for
Yeah.
that.
thank you.
So is any new data collection being produced to track the progress of 14 plus movers and their post GCSE's destinations?
Post GCSE.
Yes.
Yeah, so once they've gone on to A-level and so on.
Students would. You mean after A level where they go?
Yes.
No,
Well,
Well,
okay, you
I
go.
think it's meant for A-level, isn't it? Because
To track.
to separate those O-level, and GCSE and A-level, because once they've been moved to Holier at 14, presumably they'll have a better opportunity, that's the understanding, isn't it, of going to a school with more academic choices.
And also
So
in their
is
minds.
that data being collected and analysed?
Yes.
There's a few things there. First of all, the students aren't moved; they choose to go. They're not forcibly moved. That's a really important point to make. Second, in terms of academically choice, not necessarily. There will be a range of GCSEs in all the other schools available. So there are choices in those schools. I don't think we can see it that way.
So we
But,
possibly.
yep, sorry.
Sorry, we were looking like the chair mentioned in the sense that some will go on into further education, but some may choose to go into academic technical courses, apprenticeship. So have you got some sort of
We just want to know
data
if this is being
collection
tracked to
of
see
how it's
how
happening?
it's working.
Yeah.
The choices the young people are
if you
making.
mean at 16, when they finish their GCSEs at Holier,
Yes.
15, A-level, whatever, is
Okay.
any of it being tracked to see how effective it is?
After 14 plus.
we know destinations
So we have
of young
pupil level
people,
data, yeah. All of,
And
Whether
is that
you-
analysed and compared to children in other schools and how they're doing?
Well, there's two challenges there. One is that post 16, every child would not remain in the 11 to 16 schools by nature. So if you want to track at 18 where they go to, they will either end up doing A
GCSE
level.
then?
Yeah, at GCSE as to what destination they go to for A level. Yes, we can of course track that. But if you're academically selective, you select on academic performance by definition, and therefore you are likely to have most of those students go on to perhaps an academic pathway.
I think one of the interesting things that we heard that some of the pupils that stayed in their feeder schools and then went on to a different school to do A levels did not perform as well at their A levels as those who had gone at 14.
Some, yeah.
That's whether you've got data
Yeah.
on
It
that.
would be good to have the data and
No,
see if it's
you're
being
right.
analysed.
We do track that data. How we would present that is another question. And let
You'd
me
be
get
looking
back
for
to
an
you on that.
attrition rate. You'd be looking for an attrition rate of those that have gone to Holier from the feeder schools.
I think,
And then a success rate for those comparison how well they do at A level.
I think it's best we probably take this away because there's
Think about
a
it.
lot of different components in
Yeah,
there.
there are.
But all I can say is that we have very good data on pupils, how they progress all the way through during their journey in school, and then we can look at that data in a number of different ways.
Can I also say, we must be very careful not to undervalue the vocational pathway.
No, I get that, but this was very specifically just about the academic
Okay.
achievement.
Well, about A-level, you mean?
The
GCSEs as well.
the GCSEs.
So the 14 plus
so you-
transfer, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and that's exactly the type of question we need to address into the future.
If you can follow that up in
Yeah.
writing, it would be good.
So
So
the-
my
sorry.
next questions are about funding for schools. We had prepared a number of questions following the updated funding formula, and then also following yesterday's JEP headline, we've also asked a little bit more. So, Minister, the Jersey Evening Post headline was "Schools more than £2 million in debt." One of the objectives of the introduction of the funding formula was that it was to help reduce the financial deficit of schools and to provide financial support for additional needs.
Yeah.
So, is the formula working, and are you concerned by the deficit?
Yeah, well, we're obviously concerned by any deficit. My view on this is simple. I think for many years, we've not had the debate around the funding of schools that we need to have. So to some extent, I welcome the news report. I will say there's some inaccuracies in there, and there's some conflated issues that are put together, but that's what newspapers do in order to fill column inches. There's a few bits of context that we have to have here. One is that the budget for schools is £182 million, and if you're talking £2 million, it's about 1.14% of a difference. So let's put it in context. Now, we don't want to have schools overspending or not be able to provide for what they want, but this is in the context of increasing need that we're aware of. To give a context of the longevity of this problem, I know that when the Nason report was published, there was a suggestion that what was needed was £18 million to address special needs. What was actually allocated was £6 million, 1/3 of the money required 2 or 3 years ago. Now, that's a 66% reduction, but schools are still 1.14% out. They are working absolute miracles with the money they've got. So there are two things about the report. I don't like the fact that schools are compared with schools. I never like that. I think it's unfair. Each school has its own context, has its own challenges, has its own staffing, young people, what cohort of young people they have, the specific challenges within that school. So we need to address that. The other thing that we need to remember is that we are coming out of a really challenging time for schools over the last few years, not just of COVID, but industrial action, in terms of recruitment, and in terms of the recognition of the need within those schools. So yes, we don't want schools to overspend. I think the funding formula actually, it's impossible perhaps to say, but I do suspect that without the funding formula being where it is, that actually focuses on the type of level of need that we have in schools, those overspends may well be worse. They may be more challenging. But, you know, my argument for more money is always there. But can I just say, I know I'm taking a bit of time, but if I may, I don't have a problem with having this debate. I think we need to be open about it. And in the end, there are a couple of really big things coming through. One is, if demographics change, and we're just going to see that as an opportunity to spend less on education, this issue is going to repeat itself. So we have an opportunity going into the future to say, as demographics go down, because the numbers are still high in schools, some of the reports in the paper or some comments in the paper were just inaccurate today. Numbers are still high because of the bulge coming through. There might be less in some schools, but they're more in others. So those numbers are still high and comparable. But as those numbers go down, maintaining the funding that we have will address these issues in the longer term.
Okay, so the only thing is that
Go on.
the questions we prepared earlier about the updated funding formula are all about cuts in certain areas. So anyway, if I just continue with this bit for now, I was going to ask Kat if you could explain how this has happened with the deficit, but you've said that. So, what are you going to do about the deficit?
Well, it's a good question. We need to address where we are with those, and we also need to be sure that those numbers, as they are now, will be maintained throughout the year, because we still have time to go in the year, and there are different spending times within schools. So let's, as much as anything, see where we are as we go through the year. We do need to look at if there are areas in schools where there are costs that they don't need to have. one of the issues we've had in the past is that inflation has been at 10.4%, 12%, and the actual increase in funding for those sort of areas that are affected by inflation has been around 4%. That will accumulate over time. So we need a realism in what's happening there in terms of the costs for those schools. And so, yes, this is something we're going to have to address, but I think too often we've addressed it a bit at a time. What we need to do is have the conversation longer term about what is sustainable, what is the sustainable funding model for schools, and how can we get there.
Okay, so that's longer term. Is there anything that will be done to address it in the short term?
Short term, do you want to add anything to that?
All I would say is that, we work really, really closely with schools. We are supporting schools that we're forecasting overspends for this year. We want to be able to understand why those overspends are being forecasted and see if we are able to bring those back in line with budget, and if not, to then plan for how we're going to manage that. So that comes through the partnership working. It kind of absolutely is a nod to listening to the front line, listening to head teachers and understanding those concerns. So putting those processes in place, as well as improved financial data and reporting, understanding kind of the ebb and flow of schools. They're complicated places in terms of the way that recruitment is done. All of that has to be understood when, more so, it's not that they're not understood, but it becomes more pressurised when budgets are tight. We want to look at practice, just look at how this then kind of leads into our inclusion space and how we deliver inclusion within schools, and seeing where we can take some of the pressure off schools as well. So all of that is a very, very active part of the officers working department at the moment.
And is financial data and reporting and these meetings, are they already happening, and have they been happening in the last
They have
few years?
been, yeah. No, they have been. It's something that we've introduced this year to provide that support, to provide that kind of understanding of why schools are overspending. This is not about blaming, this is about understanding and then working with schools.
Yep.
And also looking to practice. One of the things we talk about often is around the complexity of need in schools. This is very new. Schools have always dealt with need, but to the levels and in terms of then the strategies that need to be employed within the environment, with the teaching that we have, we need to assess how we're going to improve that in the future as well. And again, listening to the staff, listening to the leaders in schools, what we can put in place to, in a sense, make that more effective with the resources we've got. But obviously, the Minister, has his comments on funding as well.
Yeah, and there's two. This came from an FOI. We get a lot of FOIs, but that FOI is a snapshot in time as well, which has then been reported very thoroughly. Okay, fair enough. As I say, I don't like the comparison between schools. I don't think that's fair on schools. It just isolates schools. And there will be specific circumstances for each specific school. And that's what we need to address as we go along. In terms of funding, longer term and shorter term, we have to have an honest conversation about this. You might not like the outcome, and that's fine. I'm the person sat here saying, I'm happy to have that conversation. We need to have it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So those meetings about financial dating and reporting, this is, I think you said from this year, start of this year?
There's always been meetings
So what-
between finance officers and schools. That's been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
What we've done is to put more support in there and to get right underneath on some of the analysis of the data.
So more regular meetings? Or
Yeah, absolutely. With those schools that we are forecasting kind of more challenging kind of spending environment.
Okay, thanks. So in the updated funding formula, 2025 report, so we see that mental health and wellbeing for primary schools was funded and now it is not funded in 2025. So please can you advise the panel the reason for this change and how it will impact services?
I think that was some specific projects, wasn't it?
Jonathan, maybe.
Jonathan, do you want to?
Yes, so I think the headline, first of all, as the Minister has described, is that we've in 25 changed the methodology, the formula. So rather than taking what the aspiration is and then pulling it back down through a rebalancing process to available budget, we've changed some of the underlying components of the formula so that it sets out available budget. It balances from the start, if you like. And we made a change to probably 24 plus lines in there. I think it's dealt with the dependencies at the back. So we had to look at taking money out of a number of areas. But I think the word cut was used before. It's not a cut, it's just a different way of getting to the same available funding.
Okay, so how is it funded now then?
How is...
Mental health and well-being for primary schools?
So I think there was a small allocation of a supplementary allowance point beforehand. That's been removed, but the responsibilities still live with the teachers. So that's
there's
shared
no-
across Senko and shared across the other roles that have been described. So it might be out of ELSA support or it might be out of Senko support, because it was felt that the supplementary allowance wasn't particularly driving anything different.
That's an important point. You don't solve that issue simply by putting in an SA2. If you put other areas in, such as ELSA, such as Senko support and training, then you can also address that mental health well-being as an integral part of the school at the same time. I think we have to be really careful when we just fund an SA2 for a project. An example for me would be, I don't actually think that you can deal with the issues of violence against women and girls by simply putting an SA point into a school. It's a cultural change within that school, and it has to come from everywhere.
Okay, so
And
there's
so
no,
that type
there
of
isn't
issue.
any specific funding allocation
Not for that SA2 point. That was an SA2, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
for mental health and well-being for primary schools?
There's a lot of money that's put towards mental health and wellbeing in schools. Absolutely, there is. Just not that specific area.
Okay, so the panel sees that teacher sickness days in a year for secondary schools has changed from 5 days in a year, funded at the supply rate of £240 per day, to 3 days in a year, funded at a supply rate of £295 per day. Can you advise the panel the reason for the adjustment?
Can we look at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these will be similar answers in that the goal was to look at the underlying components of the funding formula and make sure that the output equaled the available balance as a different methodology from just pulling the recommendation of the formula down. So that was another adjustment that was made, so that the day rate was adjusted up. So that was 295 as opposed to 240, so it reflected the actual cost of supply. But the number of days pulled down, and that aligns with lots of other work that's ongoing to generally support teachers to have, or any workforce really, to have fewer days off in terms of sickness.
But that's per teacher, isn't it?
Yes.
So I think an average would have been taken, and I would have thought that the average would have been taken. So if you average it out, it's about those many days, but we weren't paying enough per day, so we can make that change. I would also say that if that doesn't work, we have the flexibility to change that again, because this funding formula with the components as are, you can look granularly at whether those components are working and see whether they are. It also does, well, I hope, and this is going to be the test to some extent, if we get these components right, and we show them all to be working, the amount of available money, the argument for the availability of money becomes stronger, because we're very specific in our spend. It's not a generic spend, it is, I can tell you why we need this extra money. There we go. Here's
Okay.
all of the components that we have. So I
Thanks.
hope it will work that way.
Okay, so the next point is regarding minor works for both primary and secondary schools. The panel notices that this has been reduced from a core rate of £7 per square metre to a core rate of £6 per square metre. So can you advise for the reasons for that change?
It's to do with Jersey Property Holdings, I believe, role and what we're going to
Yeah,
pay.
so
them,
there's
basically.
again, so the rationale for making changes is the same. And in terms of that change, that's just part of ongoing work with JPH around what activities undertaken by them and what activities funded directly through schools. I think the majority of funding in terms of capital improvements, which is above and beyond minor works, is dealt with by JPH.
Okay, so have you received feedback from head teachers about this change, proposed change? And what was their feedback?
I don't
Not specific line items, no.
it wouldn't be. Too many head teachers are having to deal with their own repairs, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, can I just ask a question about that? So it's a formula across all schools, depending on the square metrage of the property.
That line is yes.
Okay, so you've got a sort
And,
of a
and
brand new
age,
school.
age as well.
Okay, that was my question. So you've got a brand new school like St Martin's that is clearly not going to need as much as some of the issues that you've
Yes.
got potentially in some of the town schools. So do you not allocate according to condition?
Yes.
Absolutely. So there's a
Yes, yes. So it's not, sorry.
the 6 or 7 variables there which are based around the age of the school.
Okay, thank
Well, that's a proxy for the condition, and the newest school has the smallest level per hour per metre, and the oldest school has the highest. You know, it's imperfect, but it's a very good proxy, and we've used that with JPH for a
Yeah,
number
we
of
don't
years.
just give a chunk of money
No, I
to
was
it.
gonna
I'm
say,
sure,
just for the-
I'm pretty sure
new
St
school,
Martin's and the new
obviously.
schools wouldn't mind that, but you know.
Okay.
It's also just worth noting that we
said
do
that.
hold money centrally as well for some
Yeah.
of the bigger minor projects, if though you can
Yeah.
say such a thing. For example, if a school needed to replace a lot of fencing, that can be very, very expensive. So we wouldn't expect that to be drawn from the minor works budget. We would step in.
Okay,
Can I just point out one thing as well? It's interesting that below that line is the exam fees. And you'll note that exam fees have gone up. And there are some pressures on us with exam fees that have gone up significantly. And these are some of the pressures that we have to try and deal with as well. So, and they're quite boring areas in a way. Oh, you know, everyone talks about how much it costs, but they are reality.
Yeah,
And
so-
they are
So
huge.
there's that to deal
Yeah,
with as well.
yeah.
Minister, the budget for teaching and learning materials has also been reduced for both primary and secondary schools. The rate for primary students has been reduced from £115 per pupil to £95 per pupil, and the rate for secondary students has been reduced from £200 per pupil to £180 per pupil. Please can you advise the panel about the reasons for this change?
Yeah, I don't know the reasons for that change. At first glance, I'm not particularly happy with that, but there is a specific reason behind it.
So again, all of these changes come from that same rationale, which is we have to have the aggregate proposal from the funding formula equaling the available funds that we have. So a number of different lines, and you're reflecting on 2 or 3 in your questions, have just been adjusted either up or down accordingly.
So this is a cut in learning materials for children at school.
Well, it's all cutting the base rates in terms of the amount of money available,
Yeah.
but there are also other provision around other areas.
Areas that will have higher increases.
Yeah, which will have higher increases. But yes, you're absolutely right. These are areas that need to be looked at, and we need to look at the impact of that. If those are having a profound effect, we change it and we have to go somewhere else. But this is going to be one of the arguments in terms of our overall funding levels.
Just trying to work out the percentages quickly. Is that about 20%?
No,
Cut?
10% would be from 200 to 180, because 10% of 200 is 20.
I was looking at 150.
But those are
to 95.
based on a rate of 200 per pupil. There are also other issues within schools in terms of different subjects cost less
Yeah.
than others, and it depends on that balance of subjects as well. So there is a complex calculation there.
But
And that
base-
simple base rate, I mean, I would like to see that regard with different subjects, to be quite frank.
It's basically, it is a cut. In the report, it mentions rebalancing rates, grades and hours have been reduced to bring the allocation within budget. No bottom line adjustment is therefore required. Can you describe how the reductions and rebalancing will impact on frontline teaching?
In terms of the numbers of teachers, it won't.
It's the same number, it's just arrived at through a different mathematical process.
This is a formula. There are 2 things we have to do with the funding formula. We have to do 2 things. We have to balance all that. We break it up into the different features of what that funding formula is going to be made of, and you have to put that all together to provide an amount of money for a school that fits within the amount of money that's available to you. Of course you do. Now you can increase that amount of money, and then we can increase those things. At the moment, we don't have that. We have the set amount of money, about £182 million for our schools, which we have to fit the formula in. So these have been adjusted accordingly to try and fix as best as possible where they are. Would we like to change those again? Absolutely. Of course we would. But in order to do that, we're going to have the discussion about overall funding. And that's a reality of where we are. Absolutely happy to have that conversation and where we are. I think we need to be open about it. But the first time that we've had to be being able to be this open about the way that schools are funding and the different elements of school funding. Because one of the areas, for example, is that, where are we? RON base funding, so record of needs base funding, 10 hours has stayed at 10 hours and gone from 10,288 per pupil to £11,173 per pupil. So there are increases in other areas. That's a really significant increases. I don't have a problem with those increases. They need to be there. I would, if you were to give me absolute free rein, I'd probably increase them more. Of course we would, because we want to get those right. But that's the balance that we have to have. There will be challenges within that. But but what the funding formula should be doing, and I don't think it's perfect yet, I don't think anything thinks it's perfect, is addressing the need where they are.
Okay, thank you for answering those questions. I think.
To say one more thing about that, but that analysis of how that's working, the impact that's having, is the important part of where we are,
Okay.
because then that can be changed. Yeah.
It's just like a big recipe, isn't it? Really, you know, you're making a cake. If you put too much baking powder in, it rises too much. Or if you don't put enough in, it sinks.
That's an analogy I've never thought of. Yeah. But what we want to make sure is that we've got, the education cake rising all the time. Let's be honest about it. But that's an argument that's a wider discussion we have in our society.
Sorry
We need to have it.
bring
Sorry.
it to an end. It's just we've only got
That was-
15
kind of
minutes.
That was
leads in
Deputy Miles'
and-
fault. She led me into an analogy. Go on.
It kind of leads into my questions around sort of leadership and leadership stability, really. So you've talked about the funding formula, and I think it's really interesting how those decisions are made. But to what extent do head teachers have any kind of impact into that funding formula? You know, what consultations do you have with them?
So if I take this right back to the very start, when we were first building the school funding formula as a replacement for the funding methodology of ORPU, we created a working group which had a number of primary head teachers and secondary head teachers, alongside some central staff from education, also finance business partners. And that group, whilst it's changed shape in terms of the faces around the table, has maintained head teacher representation from both primary and secondary. So they've been very, very much able to direct things all the way along, and we would hope to continue that process.
But it's the minister that has the final say.
Well, yes, I'm final say. I'm final say on everything, I suppose. I'm the person to blame in the end. I absolutely accept that. That goes with the job. Yeah.
Of course it does. Can you provide us an update on the 2 head teacher roles that have been seconded to SIPES as part of the recent leadership changes in SIPES?
Yeah, I'll start, and you might want to add a few in the details, because the 2 head teachers are on secondment to the department from schools to look at the working relationship between the department and schools. I think this is a very important project, because we have schools and the everyday running of schools, and it's very interesting that what we have are 2 teachers sat here with officers, and I think our dialogue has changed over the last year because of that distinction between the 2 areas. And I think it has been recognised by the department that what we need to do is have a greater understanding. So every person in SIPE should understand what is actually happening in the schools and the reality of what happens in the front line of schools day to day, not in particular at granular level of the experience of teaching, because they might not be teachers, but the demands that are being made. And equally, to have that understanding of the way that SIPES works and the mechanism of SIPES working for schools, I think will be equally as important, so that everybody knows that where they're working together. That's the role of these 2 head teachers, to go and talk across the board. And I hope, and I'm more than happy, to them to bring back some really challenging findings and say, this works, this doesn't. You need to do this better. That's working really well. Do more of it. And I think that is, in summary, the role of what they're doing.
How are those 2 head teachers' roles being backfilled in their respective schools?
Yeah, do you want to address that specifically?
So they've been backfilled through their leadership team within those schools. Funding has been provided to those schools to be backfilling those roles. So it's a great opportunity for senior leaders in those schools to step up to that head teacher.
So how many schools have you got across the piece that are led by acting head teachers?
So it's those 2 schools
For 2 days a week.
3 days a week.
3 days a week, sorry.
3 days a week. So that's quite a significant chunk of a working week then, when
That's
those
right, yeah.
head
And
teachers are.
Absolutely, but those head teachers are in contact with their schools.
And what is your expectation of that permanency? I mean, is this a short-term arrangement for those head teachers to be going to SIPES, and then will they go back
So the current arrangement's until the end of the academic year.
this academic year?
Yeah.
And then will you choose 2 other head teachers to do the same thing next year? or
We haven't decided yet.
But that's a good question, and that's the decision that needs to be made. If this is something that's successful, then, I think if we get that insight, perhaps it might not be 3 days a week, perhaps it'll be 1, but I think that link with schools and link between schools and the department is really important. The greater understanding there is, I don't know, I can really simplify this, but when you're sat at a desk doing some work, if you know where that's going to, then you can see it. There's been some great work done around the school meals, for example, and the People's Sanctuary were really in touch with the schools when it was happening, and they worked so well together. And I think, therefore, the work that they did was so much more targeted within those schools, and it worked really well. That's a model we want to keep going.
I can understand that, but obviously this type of model has a cost to it. The backfilling budgets that you're having to put into those particular schools. You might not be able to tell us now, but we would like to know what the total additional cost has been.
Yeah, I can't tell you that now,
Okay.
but yes, we of course.
Thank you. And the other thing that we talked about at the last meeting was a system between Social Security and SIPES to identify unregistered children.
Yeah.
And we were just wondering how that is going and have any children been flagged so far?
Yeah, this is a real challenge, and it was a really good question, and I think that's a project that's ongoing as we speak.
Okay, perhaps you could
Because
update
you're
us.
absolutely right.
Jane, do you want-
So just one of the issues we have, obviously, is immigration to the island. We are a port of the UK, but going this way, but not that way in terms of checking. So there was always going to be a challenge here. Social Security, everyone should be registered with Social Security, there should be a record there. I don't think there's a problem in them sharing those records. We can keep track of those. It's anyone who doesn't register. But then that's knowing the unknowns, and what we've got to do is find a way of ensuring that we know the unknowns. It is a real challenge, absolutely. Jane, do you want to add to that? 'Cause,
Yeah, so at the moment, we have just started cross-referencing the JY numbers, so which Social Security is sharing when children are registering for school, so at that age. But we're still very aware, as the Minister's just alluded to, that we don't, and that's reliant on somebody having registered Social Security.
So is there any link in with kind of family nursing who might be doing sort of health visiting or anything like that?
Not at present.
Okay.
No, but again, those are exactly the
Yeah.
type of things we need to look at. I'm sure there are, that we have got, we had a problem for years with government with joined up stuff, joined up records. I think they're improving. I mean, you have, may I say, an obsession with this, with a good obsession. But yes, you're absolutely right, and we want to make sure we get that right. We're certain it's very, very low numbers, if at all, but we want to get it right. This is something where we need to be 100% right.
When you do get a family that you realise, has children and the children are not in school, and I guess that could be from homeschooling purposes as well, what follow-up actions triggered?
So,
And what are the
Go on, you
thresholds?
ask.
What are the safeguarding
We talked about
thresholds
this
for
the other
sort of
day.
a home visit?
well, if any child is identified, so if a member of the public comes forward from a safeguarding perspective and says, I don't believe these young people are going to school, we then immediately do a cross-check on name and address against our school systems. So that's the first point. If the child doesn't come up, then we'll send out straight away a member of the EVO team, Education Welfare Officer team, to the house to check. And if there's nobody in, they will leave a note asking for them to call the department with a named officer. If not, if we don't hear anything, they will go back again. And then there'll be a conversation with the adults in the property.
Okay, thank you. My last few questions, I'm just very conscious of time. Are you happy for me to ask those, or would you prefer to?
We can answer anything in writing that we go and get. We can answer anything in writing, don't get done, of course.
We have quite a lot more
Okay.
yet.
Yeah, we had some questions about violence in schools as a result of the FOI, but we can put that into writing.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
do you want
please do.
to do B as one then?
Yes, well, that would be the, okay. So about the early years, Minister, with regards to the early years plan and pilots, you've previously confirmed that baseline child development data has been collected and termly assessments are underway. Will you commit to publishing anonymised progress data by pilot setting?
Yes.
Well,
If they're very small pilots, we have to be careful.
okay,
because-
that will be published.
Yeah. But if they're I don't think we have too small numbers in any of the pilots.
I think we'll end up with a couple of them in the 10 to 16 range. So we'll take advice from our data governance colleagues to make sure if there was to be a publication, we did it appropriately. But the inference on data collection is correct in that we have baseline data and then we have periodic reporting against that in terms of improvement.
And we would want to do that because actually I think the data we've got is very, very, very pleasing. And even if they are small numbers, perhaps we can give it to the panel privately so
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that would be good.
that, that's reasonable, I think.
And with what might be published as well, when do you think that would be?
So that the pilots conclude, when 12 months would be in the autumn term, it might be that we want to draw some conclusions at the end of this academic year. So things are very, very positive already. The sense from those people leading the pilots is they'll only get better. So we could probably start drawing some conclusions early, in which case the Minister might wish to publish before the start of the next academic year.
Yeah, it's got to be meaningful data. And just with one proviso, children don't improve linearly, in a linear way. I think that's been a really full. So we can publish really good data now, and then we publish again a few months later, so we haven't gone anywhere. I don't think that's fair. We need to come from the baseline. Each time we need to come from the baseline, I think. Because children are children. They go through phases of, being children. Let them be children.
And can you explain, Minister, how you're engaging with the private nursery providers to work out how best to do this new work?
There's a few things. So in the context of understanding cost of provision, which is important if there was to be a rate set for a new support for 2s to 3s, it's important to understand the actual cost of provision. And I know the Minister is very grateful for work that the private sector is undertaking with our economy team to share a lot of the cost models. So that's out of our direct sight at the moment. That's between those providers and the economy team, but at some point that will become something that's shared formally with the Minister, and that will then inform and influence what happens. Then looking through a workforce lens, there has been for some time now a workforce group that has a number of different external stakeholders involved, and I know they're just looking to conclude on the first phase of activity, determine what's worked, what hasn't worked, and what should be done in the next phase. They're going through that bit of analysis at the moment. And also the Minister has spent some time recently with childminders talking about opportunities.
We've had some very good conversation with childminders about understanding what their needs are, where they are. They weren't included in the NAF, but I would like them to be included into 2 to 3 funding. We've also had provider surveys going on. One really interesting statistic for that is that 93% of settings are now paying a living wage. So we are really moving forward here in terms of nurseries. Our dialogue has been consistent and open. The stuff with the economy department is really good. We haven't seen that yet on purpose. So there is a independent view of what the costing would be, so that whatever data comes from that, we can say, look, we've been through this process. I think I've got to say, I think the work that's been going on with those involved with this has been absolutely excellent, and it's really moved things forward.
But that's good. So with organisations like JAYA, for example, they've been involved in this work on cost of provision, workforce lens, and anything else? I mean, do you think that they could be involved
Best Start
more?
Partnership, I went to the Best Start Partnership meeting, and I'll try and attend again. They do tend to have their meetings at the same time I have my ministerial meeting on Friday, and I have said to them about that, but we'll try and get along to those. So we're trying to have open dialogue, and I'm learning as much as, everyone else in terms of where we want to get this right. I think we're very close to being able to make that offer from the data that we've got.
You don't think that they could be involved any more than what they are?
I think what we
They'll
described
always
is
be
what's
involved
happened
a bit
up to
more.
now.
Yeah.
There's a huge amount of stakeholder management required in the next phase. So we've described the work around the costs. That needs to be exposed and talked through further. That will require more engagement. The Minister is developing an offer. That needs to be shared because at the moment we talk very, very loosely about an offer for 2s to 3s. So what rate, how many hours, how many weeks, what's the expectation within those hours, who would be eligible, all those things are being developed. And in the next kind of month, 6 weeks, need to be exposed to many different industry providers so that we can get a sense of what might work, what might not work, where's there a hit or a miss, how can we change things and develop it. So I think some good work done so far, but plenty ahead of us. The other important bit is that the Minister's referenced capacity, so that's enough places in the sector to deal with what might be the demand for places. It feels like it's much closer. We mentioned that in the last hearing, but that's based on an interpretation of the provider survey from Q4 of last year, with some of our demographic forecasts overlaid. So we now need to get together and say, we think this is what it means. Is that what it means to you? So there's a suggestion of lots of capacity, let's say, I think 40 to 60 places, but is that genuine capacity that a parent would want? So there's one thing saying, I've got some spaces, and another thing saying those spaces are in demand from families. I'll be a little bit silly about it, but if it's in the 2 to 5 o'clock on a Friday, that might not be very usable, but it might nonetheless be reported as capacity. So again, further engagement required to test some of our assumptions and be satisfied they're reasonable and they're valid.
Okay, thank you. We're just coming up to 11 now. Have you got another few minutes, or we would draw it to a close?
Yeah, we can, a couple of minutes. I wanted to say something at the end if I could.
Okay, yes. So, Bea, do you want to continue? We got up to number 36.
Do you want to just finish that?
Oh,
and then
okay.
I'll go to Highlands?
In fact, I
Yeah.
think that a
You
lot of
just
that's
finish
been
it.
answered already. So, and we could send some of these in writing. So I'll just ask a question about Highlands College development, or do you want to do that?
You do it.
Okay. So following the funding allocation agreed for 2025, what progress is expected to be achieved at Highlands College over the course of this year? And are there any risks already identified that could delay the start of works?
Okay, so what I've got here is a prioritised programme of works has now been agreed between the college and Jersey Property Holdings. JPH, Jersey Property Holdings, now commence with the tender process for various work items in the next month. Will be awarding contracts and mobilising for start on site. And monthly meetings are being held to ensure programmes are being made in line with progress is being made in line with the programme. So the work is ongoing and should be starting soon. I would imagine that the best time to do that would be starting the summer holidays when there's less people there. Although I believe it's used in the summer holidays by some of the language colleges.
Will be less used.
Yeah, but there will be less
less
used.
capacity.
We can send you more detail, actually.
Yeah, we'll send you
Yeah,
more detail
please.
about
And I mean, that's good, but I think it was it in October, November last year when we saw the water coming through the roof and so on. It was taking a long time. But anyway,
Hey, look, we've got Jersey Property Holdings actually doing some things there, and that's all I'm going to say, and I'm very pleased that they are.
And
Thank
I
you very much.
concur.
okay, thank you. Okay, so you said you wanted to say something?
I just want to say one thing if you're finishing, is that tonight I'm attending something which is a book has been launched on Ireland by our students who have written a book, you know, the X-Files. This is a book called The Jersey Files, and it's a series of 15 short stories in conjunction with an author in the UK. It's available online to buy, and I think it's a wonderful book, wonderful work from our students. So often we hear about our students and issues of social media and all of these things, but when they produce something that is a literary piece like this, I think it'd be really nice to support it. So I just want to mention it because those students tonight will be a celebration of their work, and I'm very proud of them, and I think their teachers should be proud, and certainly the parents are, and they should be proud of themselves. It's called Jersey Files. It's available on all good booksellers online. There we go. I know I shouldn't plug a book, but I am.
Okay,
If
so
I may for
people
our
just-
students.
People just search the
Yes,
Jersey Files
Jersey
and it
Files,
should come
yeah.
up. Okay.
Brilliant.
All right, well, thank you very much, everyone.